I didn't think anything was wrong at first. I was in my kitchen, pouring hot water into a mug, same routine I've had for years. But when I looked up at the window over the sink, I saw my reflection move a second late. Not glitchy, not blurry, just delayed. And the part that's been bothering me ever since isn't that it happened, it's that when I tested it again, it didn't happen a second time. I'm telling this 9 years after the winter at Halcyon Drift Station, and I'm starting with the kettle because that's how I still measure the distance between the life I had and the life that replaced it. On the night it began, I was standing in my kitchen in Duluth, with my sleeves rolled to my forearms, watching a dented steel kettle tremble on the back burner. Claire had gone upstairs with a headache. The dishwasher was humming. My dog, Ranger, was asleep with his chin on my boot. On the table, I had station briefing folders spread in neat stacks, ice core scheduling, fuel accounting, seismic calibration, emergency shelter protocol. I liked paperwork more than most people admitted they did. Lists, cross-checks, the comfort of things that either matched or didn't. I was 42 then, old enough to know that my habits weren't quirks anymore, but structure. I wiped the counter while the water heated. I aligned the folders. I checked the satellite phone battery twice even though it was already packed. Claire had left a note under the sugar jar because she knew I'd find it when I made tea. It told me to stop pretending 6 months on an Arctic station was a vacation from ordinary life, and to call whenever the satellite let me. She had drawn a crooked smile after it, the way she always did on purpose. I remember touching the note and thinking that leaving was easier when the room still held the shape of the person you loved. The mug rack clicked softly when the dishwasher shifted. The window over the sink reflected the kitchen back at me. Yellow light, clean counters, the dark yard outside, and me moving through a frame I knew better than any map. The kettle began to sing. Ranger lifted his head without opening his eyes. I turned off the burner and reached for my mug. I had one rule before any field deployment: nothing mysterious in the first hour of the day or the last hour of the night. No accident reports, no missing person stories, no videos about remote crews vanishing in bad weather. There was enough noise in the world without inviting more into the house. I poured the water. Steam rose and softened the glass. That was when my reflection raised its hand a moment after mine had already dropped. If this were fiction, that would have been enough to make me cancel, stay home, tell Claire I'd seen something in the kitchen that didn't line up with the laws I trusted, let another seismologist take the winter berth. But the mind protects itself with insultingly practical explanations. Fatigue, steam, light angle, a lag in perception. I stood there with tea in my hand and waited for my pulse to settle. When I lifted my arm again, the reflection matched me exactly. Ranger yawned. The dishwasher hummed. Upstairs, a floorboard sighed under Claire's step. I told myself I had seen the tail end of my own motion and dressed it afterward with meaning. 2 days later, at the airfield, I told the story as a joke. Not the way it had landed in my body, just the surface of it. Alan Mercer, our station chief, was leaning against a cargo pallet with a carpenter's pencil behind his ear, checking manifests. Natalie Price from Atmospheric Science was trying to zip her parka and drink coffee at the same time. Jonah Reed, our senior meteorologist, was smoking in the designated patch of ice and pretending the rule against smoking near fuel drums applied mostly to other people.
You should have stayed home. The Arctic loves a premonition.
The Arctic loves bad sleep and loose wiring. Leave your ghost in Duluth, Michael.
Michael Vale, Seismology and Signal Analysis, though my official title was broader and duller, Environmental Systems Monitoring. I had been chosen because I had the right technical range and because I had a reputation for being difficult to impress. I wasn't a romantic about isolation. I believed enough time alone in a steel box made people poetic in self-defense. Halcyon Drift was not publicly called North Pole anything. Officially, it was a multinational polar observation platform positioned over a stable section of multi-year pack. Unofficially, in old grant language and procurement threads, it had inherited names from earlier projects. One of them was Polar Station 37. That mattered later. At departure, it was just Halcyon, a name too calm for what waited there. The flight north was all white beneath us, an engine noise around us. By the time the station came into view, the world outside had already become the kind of darkness that erases scale. The station appeared first as a smear of sodium light through blowing snow, then the antenna masts, then the elevated walkways, then the modules themselves, connected like vertebrae on black steel supports driven into ice that shouldn't have felt permanent and yet had been forced to imitate permanence by enough money and will. There were 14 of us for the winter cycle. Alan Mercer, station chief, Jonah Reed, meteorologist, Natalie Price, atmospheric chemistry, Sanjay Batra, electrical systems, Elena Markovich, glaciology, Patrick Sloan, drilling operations, Theo Barnes, medic, Lisa Coe, communications, Victor Hale, cook, 2 mechanical techs, 1 data manager, 1 geodesist, and me. 14 names. I still make myself say them sometimes so I don't turn them into one blurred thing. The first weeks were normal. That's important. We unpacked, calibrated systems, checked inventories, set rotating schedules, learned the weak points in each other's tempers. Victor baked bread every 3rd day. Jonah complained about the coffee. Alan ran morning briefings at 0700 station time, which was a compromise clock that belonged to no real place beyond the station walls. I inspected the seismic chain, including the deep array feeds tied to the sub-ice bore package. Halcyon carried standard environmental systems and a deeper experimental package, funded through layered grants that disguised ambition as geology. We were listening beneath the ice for strain, fracture migration, and long-period movement through structures older than human weather. 3 weeks in, I saw the first impulse train. It came in during a quiet review window while I was alone in Lab C with reheated coffee and a scarf still around my neck because that room never sealed heat properly. The trace rose on the monitor as a narrow, regular set of low-amplitude spikes against background noise. Not random, not thermal chatter, not the broad, messy signature of ice shift. Neat, repeating. I checked the timestamp, the sensor channel, the mirrored feed. 94 seconds. Then again, 94 seconds. Exactly 94. I sat there waiting for the pattern to break so I could laugh at myself for assigning meaning too early. It didn't. I opened archived local tremor data, overlaid the new trace, checked for maintenance events, scheduled pulses, known interference bands. Nothing fit. At 0248, I printed the segment because I trusted paper when my own certainty started to slide. In the margin, I wrote 94 sec exact. Verify hardware. At breakfast, I showed Alan.
New station, new problems. Last year, we had heater harmonics that looked like a heartbeat until Sanjay found the ground fault.
The package is new.
Then the problem is new too. Good. That's why we have jobs.
He slid the paper back without looking alarmed, which I respected and resented in equal parts. Natalie asked what we were talking about. Jonah looked at the printout longer than anyone else and then bit into his toast.
If it starts spelling your name, let me know. Otherwise, it's probably the station complaining.
That was how the anomaly entered the room. Absorbed by routine, dulled by humor, filed under manageable. If I had been more careful, I would have noticed who didn't smile. By protocol, I ran a full verification on the deep array line. Sensor health, cable continuity, clock synchronization, shielding integrity. I checked the bore package logs, power events, maintenance history, firmware changes. I had Sanjay isolate adjacent systems in case electromagnetic bleed was creating a false cadence. Nothing changed. Every 94 seconds, the impulse returned. What people forget about escalation is that it begins as inconvenience. The pulse made my reviews longer. It complicated reporting. It added friction. I built spreadsheets no one asked for. I stopped taking the scenic way through the station because I wanted to pass Lab C every time I had 5 spare minutes. Eventually, I converted one segment into compressed audio. When I boosted it through the monitors, the room filled with an oscillation so low it felt less heard than inhabited. My stomach tightened immediately. Not fear at first, nausea, pressure behind the eyes, a sensation like my body was being tuned against my consent. I killed the playback after 13 seconds and sat very still until the room stopped tilting. Theo found me there with my hand over my mouth.
Food poisoning?
Signal processing.
That's not a diagnosis.
I boosted a sub-audible band.
You look gray.
He dropped 2 electrolyte packets on the desk and told me to hydrate like a normal mammal. Theo had a medic's economy with worry. He didn't dramatize symptoms, he cataloged them. I didn't tell him that while the playback ran, I'd had the sudden conviction that something below me was aware of being listened to. That evening, Jonah missed a scheduled weather call. It wasn't unheard of. Radios failed. Batteries died fast in the cold. You learned not to overreact to one absence. Alan sent me to the observation room because I was already in the upper module reviewing storm data. The room was dark except for monitor glow. Snow beyond the narrow windows moved like static. Jonah sat facing a screen with his back straight, one hand flat on his thigh. The screen beside him showed a mirrored seismic feed I hadn't routed there. "Jonah," I said. He didn't turn. I came farther in. The room smelled stale, like overheated electronics and old coffee. "Jonah." This time he moved, but only his head, slowly, as if I had interrupted a conversation already underway.
You hear it?
Hear what?
Them.
He said it without emphasis, no performance, no grin. He was 62, a veteran of stations that no longer existed, a man people deferred to when weather began stripping dignity from machinery. "There's no them," I said. "There's a periodic signal in the deep array."
That's what I mean.
"What do you hear?"
Not with your ears.
Then he smiled, and I use that word only because there isn't a better one. It wasn't comfort, it wasn't humor. It looked like recognition.
They're calling up.
I shut the mirrored feed off. He blinked like a man waking in a chair after falling asleep in front of a television. After that, he seemed embarrassed, then annoyed, then normal enough to resent me walking him to Theo for a quick check. Theo found nothing urgent: elevated blood pressure, mild dehydration, fatigue. Alan wrote it off as poor sleep and told me not to turn operational anomalies into folklore. Outwardly, I stayed the same. Inwardly, something had shifted. Jonah's phrasing nested inside the memory of my kitchen window, "not with your ears." That had been the quality of the delayed reflection, too. Not exactly seen, registered somewhere deeper and earlier than language. The dreams started 2 nights later. I want to be careful here because dreams are cheap material in horror and mostly useless in a report, but they matter because they were shared before we admitted they were shared. Mine was simple, absolute dark, not ordinary dark, total deprivation, the kind that removes shape from your own body. I stood on something flat and cold. Somewhere far below, enormous movement passed from left to right with the patience of tectonic drift. Not stomping, not burrowing, something slower and larger. I couldn't see it. I only knew its scale from the way the surface beneath me answered it, from the way my teeth seemed to hear it before my ears did. Then I woke with my jaw clenched so hard it hurt. At breakfast, Natalie set down her spoon and asked, too casually, if anyone else had dreamed about standing over something moving in the dark. No one answered. Then Elena said yes, then Sanjay. Jonah kept eating. By mid-August, which in polar night means almost nothing beyond what date you type into a log, the 94-second rhythm had migrated. The magnetometers began showing periodic noise at matching intervals. Then the electromagnetic induction units. Then one power conditioning panel in Module D started registering transient fluctuations that made no engineering sense because the load never changed. Sanjay spent half a day tracing lines, opening housings, muttering its circuit design like it had personally betrayed him.
If you want a haunting, at least ask for one that respects wiring.
He said it dryly, but he didn't smile. He had started carrying an analog watch inside his coat, even though the whole station ran on synchronized digital time. You think it's interference?
I think everything is interference until proven malignant.
The satellite link degraded next. Not all at once. First, packet loss and brief dropouts during scheduled uplinks. Lisa kept finding fallback routes, cursing weather and procurement in equal measure. Then, the interval chains changed. You get used to a certain kind of emptiness at headset audio. Carrier hush, electronic distance, the shape of no one there yet. During one transmit window, I was standing behind Lisa when I heard the hush deepen into texture. Not loud, intimate. 3 slow exhalations. Then the interval I knew too well, not as counted beats, but as cadence. Lisa pulled one ear cup off.
Did you just key?
No.
Someone did.
She rewound the local buffer. The playback gave us noise, drift, and something that could have been compression artifact if you wanted it badly enough. I wanted it badly enough. I said so. She nodded too fast. Later that same shift, I found a duplication in my notebook. At 2310, I had written, checked lower array offset. Impulse remains exact. Need analog cross-check. I remember writing it once. The next morning, the same sentence appeared again 4 lines lower in the same handwriting, same pressure, same slant, as if I had copied it later without memory of doing so. I tested myself. I wrote a nonsense phrase on the next page, blue lamp before snow, circled it, locked the notebook away. After sleep, it was still there once, nothing added. I told myself I had duplicated the earlier line during fatigue and forgotten. That should have been enough. Then, Alan called a team meeting because more people had reported the same dream. We met in the galley. Victor had left a tray of cinnamon biscuits on the counter, and the sweetness smelled wrong against the room's tension. Alan stood at the end of the table with both palms flat on the laminate.
We are not going to contagion ourselves into a story. Same food, same light deprivation, same stressors, same conversations. Shared dreams are evidence of being human in a box.
He looked at me when he said box.
The synchronized instrumentation isn't stress, I said. We have a recurring deep array signal aligning with multiple systems.
And we're investigating it.
We're minimizing it.
Because panic is not analysis.
Natalie rubbed both hands over her face.
Then call it analysis. People are losing time. I found frost on the inside of my locker this morning, and my recorder running under my bed.
You should listen to it,
The room went still.
Why?
because maybe you answered.
Alan told him to stop, quietly, more dangerous that way. That night, I listened to the audio Natalie had found. At first, it was blanket rustle, room heat ticking in pipes, the small mechanical language of sleeping. Then, very softly, her voice, not words, a murmur. I raised the gain until the hiss rose. Beneath it was the same low, repeated pattern, and under Natalie's breathing, another rhythm that did not belong to a resting human body. I shut it off and stared at the dark monitor long enough for it to reflect me back. This time, my reflection moved exactly when I did. which terrified me more than the delay.
The first heartbreak with ordinary time came from a simple experiment, because that is how betrayal works when your identity is built on measurement. It arrives as two numbers that should match. I started 2 chronometers at 0700 after briefing. 1 digital unit synchronized to our satellite reference, 1 spring-driven field timer from the emergency kit that I wound by hand and kept in my pocket. If the station network was drifting, the mechanical timer should stand apart. At 0700 the next day, they disagreed by 17 minutes. Not a second or two, not tolerable drift, 17 minutes. I reran it, same pattern. The station clocks still agreed with each other, but when Lisa rechecked reference sync, the correction packets from satellite time were inconsistent, stepping and stepping back. Not enough to explain all of it, enough to ruin trust. Then our geodetic positioning did something worse. Halcyon was a drift station. Motion was expected, but drift follows broad physical logic: wind, current, pressure. Our latest fixes mapped a path with tiny directional corrections that looked intentional, not random wandering, but guided adjustment, as if the station were tracing a shape too large to perceive from inside it. Elena and our geodeticists spent half a day trying to blame the software. The path remained.
It looks like handwriting,
Elena said. She regretted it immediately. The corridor sounds started the same day. No monster, no slam, just footsteps where footsteps couldn't be. Slow, even, passing from one end of a module to the other at hours when everyone was logged elsewhere. We checked, we joked. Then we stopped joking and started moving in pairs, because every time one person heard it alone, the doubt afterward was worse than fear. People began saying strange things in fragments and then denying memory of saying them. Ross, one of the mechanics, looked up from a valve inspection and told me there was no point barricading a place whose floor was listening. 20 minutes later, he swore he had said no such thing. Natalie asked whether human hearing had been a historical mistake. Then she flinched and said she only meant the freezer unit was getting on her nerves. Jonah started referring to they more and more casually.
They don't like the generators hunting. They're closer when the pressure drops. They're patient. That's the problem.
Alan finally restricted him from solo duty. Jonah accepted it with amused tolerance, which scared me more than resistance would have. I turned to paper because the station's digital records had begun to fray around the edges. Not dramatic erasure, a checksum failure here, a mislabeled directory there, archived packets opening as blank space or strings of broken characters. In storage, too, beneath comms hardware and meal kits, there was a row of old administrative boxes transferred from a predecessor site during decommissioning years back. At the bottom of a mildew-stained carton, I found a folder marked only with an obsolete project code and a handwritten sticker, P37-Retention Review. Inside were photocopies, crew manifests from 40 years earlier, weather summaries, internal memos with paragraphs blacked out so heavily that the censoring itself became content. One incident report survived, mostly intact. The earlier station, not in the exact same legal footprint but close enough, had lost communications over 11 days. Recovery was delayed by weather. When aerial support finally reached the last known coordinates, there was no station. Not destroyed, not visibly damaged. Gone. Anchoring scars in ice, minimal debris, no confirmed bodies, no final evacuation request in surviving records. Investigation suspended pending classified review.
On the last page, a clipped note from another memo referenced repeating substructural acoustic events preceding personnel degradation. Personnel degradation. That phrase did more damage to me than any direct warning would have. It meant someone before us had seen enough to invent terminology for losing people without admitting what they were being lost to. I brought the folder to Alan.
Where did you get this?
Storage 2.
This should have been in restricted retention.
Was it known?
Not by me.
He said it fast, with genuine anger under it. That mattered. At least part of the deception had started before him. We need emergency extraction, I said.
In a storm cycle with a broken link, based on redacted copies and a signal anomaly?
Based on 14 people beginning to behave like a pattern is teaching them.
Watch your language.
Watch the station. That should have been the break between authority and reality. It wasn't. Disaster rarely announces itself cleanly. Alan promised a limited internal alert, tighter watch rotations, stricter buddy policy, and full prep for evacuation if the satellite window stabilized. All reasonable. All too late. That night, Theo came to my room carrying instant cocoa because Victor had begun brewing tea strong enough to strip paint, and Theo suspected half the station was over-caffeinated into fragility.
I read the old report.
Alan showed you?
He wanted a medical opinion on personnel degradation, which is a disgusting phrase. So here's my opinion. Sleep loss, isolation stress, shared environmental trigger, chemical exposure if we're unlucky.
And if we're very unlucky?
Then something is entraining people.
The room was quiet except for the vent and the distant settling of steel on ice. I became aware of how close he was standing, not as romance, but as human warmth in a place where everyone had begun to feel slightly translated out of themselves. He set the mug down and put one hand on my shoulder. Brief, practical, steady. That mattered because it changed the plot. For the first time, I wasn't carrying the full weight of disbelief alone.
Don't keep this in your head by yourself.
I covered his hand with mine. Then don't leave me alone with it. The next morning, Theo was found in the infirmary archive room with the lights off, listening to an unplugged speaker. He returned to himself quickly enough to frighten us all. Theo blinked in the light, looked at the dead speaker in his hands, and swore he had only come for saline packs. He looked at my face as if it should explain everyone else's. For the rest of the day, he functioned normally, which would have comforted me if normal had not already become suspicious. The signal intensified during a storm. Not the seismic trace. That remained exact, almost insultingly controlled. One pulse every 94 seconds, as if whatever generated it had no need to hurry. But the felt component changed. The low-frequency pressure that had once made me slightly nauseous began to move through the modules like weather inside steel. You'd be halfway down a corridor and suddenly know, without hearing anything obvious, that your heartbeat was trying to align with something outside you. Conversation would falter. Someone would grip a railing. Then it would pass. Victor burned a tray of bread so badly the galley filled with bitter smoke. While he cursed and yanked it from the oven, Ross and Natalie stood near the sink, humming the same beat under their breath. Alan separated them more forcefully than the moment seemed to require. That evening, Sanjay reported a problem at the east external access lock. The cycling mechanism kept arming as if someone were requesting egress from inside, though no one was at the panel. We pulled logs. 4 activation attempts in 90 minutes. No authorized badge trace. Alan assigned me and Ross to inspect. The steel skin of the corridor moaned under wind load. Ross walked half a step ahead of me with his flashlight bouncing over condensation-slicked walls. Every 94 seconds, the emergency exit indicator flickered. You seeing that?
They want it open.
He said it conversationally. Ross.
It's louder outside.
I grabbed his arm before he reached the manual release. He twisted harder than I expected, not wild, efficient. His face was blank, almost peaceful.
They're asking nicely.
Nobody is asking anything.
That's why you're still afraid.
He drove his shoulder into me, trying to pass. We hit the wall, the flashlight skidded across the grating. I locked both hands around his wrist and forced the release lever back under its guard while he started whispering. Not words at first. A count, maybe. Then I realized the intervals between breath and syllable matched the deep array pulse exactly. He was speaking in the rhythm itself. When Alan and Sanjay arrived, Ross was standing with his forehead against the inner door, whispering to the steel. He remembered none of it later, or pretended not to. At that stage, the distinction mattered less than I wanted it to. After that, Alan ordered all external hatches physically blocked except the main emergency route. Buddy policy became mandatory even for bathroom runs after lights down, which would have sounded absurd anywhere else. At Halcyon, absurdity was already losing ground. The station split into clusters. People who still trusted themselves, people who watched those people too closely, people moving between both states. I slept in short shifts and left voice notes for myself in case the notebooks failed. Date, time, condition. No unscheduled playback, no audio gain tests alone. Verify names at breakfast, verify your own handwriting. Do not follow voices into unlit modules. Then came the white noise. The satellite internet no longer carried usable data, but the down channel still brought broad hiss when we pushed gain. Lisa called me in because she thought she had found structured interference. We sat shoulder to shoulder in communications, the waveform crawling pale across the monitor. At first, it was nothing, then not nothing. The hiss thickened in bands, a pattern of rises and shallow drops, human intonation without language, pleading almost. Or that's what my brain did to it, turned contour into motive.
Tell me that's pareidolia.
It is.
Say it like you mean it.
I couldn't. We boosted further. The voices, or whatever created the shape of voices, stayed indistinct, but under them the 94-second cadence remained, like a hidden metronome. Then one phrase surfaced, not in any language I knew, not clean, more a cluster of syllables clearing briefly from weather. Lisa ripped her headset off.
That was my mother's voice.
No.
It was.
Lisa.
She said my name.
Her mother had been dead 6 years. I replayed the buffer through external speakers. This time, there were no words, just hiss and that low, patterned rise beneath it. Lisa locked herself in her room for 13 hours. That same night, I searched Patrick Sloane's quarters. He had become evasive whenever I asked for full-depth history on the experimental bore package. In a maintenance manual, I found a notebook written in all capital print. Depth readings beyond the approved cutoff. Corrected coordinates that matched no charted point. Repeated notation, response increasing with proximity. Then, across one page so hard the next sheets were scarred. They answered. I confronted him in the machine shop while the storm hammered the station.
You shouldn't have gone through my things.
You shouldn't have drilled past authorization.
You think authorization matters under this much ice?
I think depth matters.
We were getting returns from below the mapped substrate. We thought it was a cavity or heat. We thought a lot of things.
And
the first time we pushed deeper, the cable came back warm.
No model we had supported that. Warm from what?
Contact.
That was the moment I stopped believing procedure could contain it. Alan authorized a departure attempt.
after Ross was found in the generator annex, singing the 94-second rhythm with 3 others who later swore they had only gone there for a noise complaint. The plan was compromised from the start, weather still unstable, comms dead, navigation questionable, but waiting had become more dangerous than movement. Those of us still judged clear enough to travel were me, Alan, Natalie, Theo, and Sanjay. Patrick argued to come. Alan refused. Jonah volunteered with that same calm recognition smile, and Alan threatened to sedate him if he left his bunk. The rest of the crew were locked into paired modules with supplies and internal intercom only. It sounds monstrous until you imagine the alternative. I helped Theo prepare injectors and restraints in the infirmary. Outside, the wind had dropped with the kind of sudden silence that makes you mistrust your own hearing. Theo packed medication with fast, flat motions, then leaned both hands on the counter.
If we get out, nobody's gonna believe the first version we tell.
Then, we tell the measurable parts first.
What if the measurable parts are the infected ones?
I had no answer. He reached up and straightened the collar of my parka. I caught his wrist without thinking. Come back with me. That touch mattered, because it created a promise the story could punish. Theo's hand stayed in mine 1 second too long. There was nothing romantic in it, but there was intimacy. 2 people openly choosing the same fear.
I'm trying to.
We left at what station clocks called 0315. 2 snow vehicles, 1 spare sled, emergency beacon, analog compass, paper charts we no longer trusted, fuel reserve. The sky above the station should have shown familiar winter stars. Instead, I saw arrangements that were almost constellations and not, angles slightly wrong, brightness where dimmer stars should have been. The kind of discrepancy an exhausted brain can invent until you lift a chart and realize the chart helps nothing. We drove east by heading, then by flagged markers, then by dead reckoning when the markers ran out. 10 minutes became 40, 40 became impossible to verify. The nav display drew loops over the ice. Sanjay's analog watch ticked in his pocket, while my own seemed to skip. Once, Natalie shouted over the engine noise that she could see station lights behind us. There should have been nothing behind us but open dark. I didn't turn. The first vehicle stalled without warning. Not fuel, not engine fault, it simply stopped, as if it had run into a section of reality where combustion no longer held. Alan signaled for a halt. We stood, in the cold, under a sky I didn't recognize. Then, the wind shifted, and ahead of us, through the dark, I saw light. Station light. Yellow rectangles, antenna mast, walkway glare. Halcyon. We had gone in a straight line from the station and returned to it from the opposite bearing without ever turning enough to permit it. I know how that sounds. I know the simplest explanation: disorientation, whiteout, exhaustion. Fine, then explain why our outbound track markers approached the station from a direction none of us had traveled. Explain why the stars remained wrong. Explain why Sanjay began laughing so hard he had to cover his face with both hands and then could not stop. We brought him back inside, half carried. When the main module door sealed behind us, the station was silent. No voices, no footsteps, no intercom chatter, only system hum and, somewhere deep below, the rhythm that had finally stopped pretending to be only a signal. The common areas were lit. Cups sat where they had been left. In the galley, one of Victor's bread knives lay on the floor. In communications, a headset hung loose from its jack. The crew we had locked into paired modules were gone. No blood, no signs of struggle. Doors closed from outside or inside in ways that made no immediate sense. Beds cold. Some parkas missing, some still hanging. The station looked occupied by absence. Alan took command because command was all he had left.
Sweep. No one alone. Regroup at comms in 15.
I went with Theo toward the lower access where the bore package controls lived. Every reflective surface on the way became a test I didn't want to take. Window inserts, steel cabinets, dark monitors. Twice I thought I saw my motion lag. Once I saw Theo's reflection look directly at me before his actual face turned. I didn't mention it. At the bore control room, the hatch to the deep shaft stood open. Warm air rose from the access collar. Not enough to fog the room, enough to feel wrong against my legs. Theo shone his light down. The beam disappeared into a throat of dark webbed with cables and condensation. Then we heard singing. Not loud, somewhere deeper in the service corridor. Multiple voices, no words. Only that measured interval carried in human throats. Theo reached for the hatch lever.
We close it.
If they're below,
Then we close it.
we hauled the hatch halfway when something struck from beneath. Not a dramatic blow, just a firm contact, like a hand or tool testing the underside. Theo flinched. I locked my weight against the wheel until the hatch ceded and the lugs caught. My whole body shook afterward. When we returned to communications, Alan was gone.
Natalie sat at the console with one fist against her mouth. Sanjay stood facing the dead monitors, whispering to them. "Where's Alan?"
He heard someone on the shortwave.
Who?
He said it was the recovery team.
Hope is the oldest vulnerability. Theo crossed to Sanjay and turned him by both shoulders. Sanjay blinked slowly.
They know our names now.
That was when the question narrowed. The station no longer contained 14 separate chances to survive. It contained shrinking routes through a place that had begun using us as instrumentation. We found Alan in the archive room, sitting on the floor beside the open P-37 folder. Not injured, not restrained, just listening.
There was a transmission.
No.
It used my wife's call sign.
His wife had been dead 11 years. Alan.
I know she's dead, Michael. I'm not a fool.
Then stand up.
It knew things only she knew.
That was when I lost him. Not physically, morally. His face held the expression of a man who had found one impossible exception and built a bridge out to it before reason could burn it down.
Alan, we're moving.
You go.
We're not leaving you.
That's not your decision anymore.
By the time we got him back on his feet, Sanjay had vanished from communications.
It would be easier if I could say the station swallowed people in dramatic order. It didn't. It thinned us, one by one. Sometimes by distance, sometimes by surrender, sometimes by convincing a person that standing still in the wrong room was a meaningful choice. Sanjay was nowhere on internal cameras because the camera timestamps had become useless and several feeds looped 10-second segments of empty corridors, as if reality itself had started rehearsing. We tracked him by sound. Metal tapping from below. Not singing. Tool on pipe. 3 strikes, pause, then the longer pattern we all knew. The lower service ladder led to the bore maintenance chamber. The hatch we had sealed was open again. I didn't ask how. Warmth flowed from the shaft more strongly now, carrying a mineral smell beneath steel and lubricant, something ancient and damp that had no business existing in that frozen world. Natalie refused to come lower. I don't blame her. She stayed at the upper ladder with the flare pistol and emergency beacon. Theo and I descended. The chamber lights flickered at 94-second intervals, not with power load, with the pulse. Each dimming erased the ladder for half a second and brought it back. I heard Sanjay before I saw him.
It's not under us. That's what's wrong with how we think about it.
He stood by the open shaft collar with one hand on a cable bundle, speaking into the dark. "Step away," I said.
Michael, you need to stop calling it a signal. Signals want to cross distance. This wants distance gone.
Step away.
I thought it was in the wiring because I'm an electrician. Jonah thought it was weather because weather was the only thing old enough for him to respect. You thought it was seismic because you need a graph before you panic. It used whatever shape we trusted.
Theo moved left, angling toward him.
Sanjay,
Don't say my name like that. It sounds smaller now.
For one clean second, I saw the man he had been, terrified behind whatever had been layered over him. That was enough to make me take a step closer. He lunged, not at Theo, at me, both hands out like someone trying to pull another person from traffic. We slammed into the rail around the shaft. The room spun. Theo grabbed my parka and hauled backward while Sanjay kept speaking in that awful, calm cadence.
You have to answer or you stay divided.
Theo injected him through the sleeve. Sanjay sagged so suddenly we nearly went over together. We dragged him from the collar and zip-tied his wrists. He wept once the sedative started working, quietly. Not because he was fully himself again, because some part of him understood what was being resisted. We strapped him to a cot in the infirmary. Natalie was gone. Her flare pistol lay on the upper landing, still loaded. The emergency beacon blinked from the floor. Alan's voice came over an internal line twice, asking for clearance to open an external hatch from somewhere he could not have been. Theo refused to answer. By then, I knew not all of us were leaving. The question had narrowed again, whether any part of the record would. I gathered what mattered. The old P-37 copies, my notebooks, local drive backups on 2 solid-state units, an analog cassette recorder from communications because digital corruption had become too easy to dismiss later. Theo packed a survival kit in case exterior exposure became the better death. We worked fast, which looked practical and was really grief in overalls. Jonah found us in communications, without either of us hearing him approach.
You're making souvenirs.
He stood in the doorway with frost in his beard and no gloves on, though the corridor was cold. His eyes looked ordinary. That was the worst part. Where are the others?
Listening.
To what?
The place where speech came from before mouths.
Theo shifted subtly between Jonah and the recorder bag.
He thinks this is still a medical event.
I think you're sleep-deprived, hypothermic, and standing between me and a locked door.
Then why are your hands shaking?
Mine were shaking too, not from cold, because Jonah was speaking like a man at peace with a conclusion we had not yet reached, and peace in the wrong place is worse than panic. What is it? I asked him. He looked at me almost kindly.
A correction.
Of what?
Separation.
I have turned that word over for years. Correction. Not attack. Not haunting. Not invasion. Correction. As if individuality itself were the error being resolved. He looked past me toward the dead monitor wall. I followed his gaze and saw our reflections in the glass. Mine stood half a breath behind me. Theo's looked over its shoulder toward the hallway. Jonah's did not reflect at all. Theo slammed the door shut and threw the bolt. Jonah didn't pound on it. He only said from the other side,
It gets worse if you stay inside.
He was right about that part.
The final hours came apart inside time. The station clocks held one impossible hour for too long, then skipped. Sanjay woke once under restraint and begged us not to let him hear running water because it sounded too much like speech now. Alan's voice came over an internal line asking for clearance to open an external hatch from somewhere he couldn't be. Theo refused him again. Then the whole station went still. No mechanical resonance from wind, no distant footsteps, no humming from occupied modules. Systems remained alive, but the human layer had been peeled off the soundscape. Silence can have density. It can lean. It can attend. Theo wanted one more attempt to leave through the main hatch using analog bearings only. He was right to want it. I was right to know it might fail. We argued for the first and last time.
Staying here is consent.
Going out blind is suicide.
Better choice.
For who?
For whichever version of us is still making decisions.
He grabbed the recorder back. I caught the strap. The look he gave me wasn't anger. It was betrayal sharpened by urgency.
Don't make me leave you with this place.
I let go. That was my unfairness, not the cosmic one, the human one. I let him go because some part of me believed the record needed a witness more than the witness needed the man beside him. I have had 9 years to invent nobler motives, and none of them hold. Theo suited up. He took one emergency beacon, one analog compass, one flare, and the spare recorder I had loaded with fresh tape. At the inner hatch, he turned once. If I don't come back in 20 minutes, don't open for anyone speaking in my voice. I nodded.
Michael?
I know.
He left. I watched him on the exterior camera until the feed washed into snow and static. For 12 minutes there was nothing. Then the camera showed him again, standing just beyond the floodlights, facing away from the station. I keyed the external speaker. "Theo!" He didn't move. "Theo, come back!" Slowly he raised one hand, not waving, palm outward, the same gesture my kitchen reflection had made over the sink in Duluth. Then he turned. The image tore with interference at the exact moment his face should have resolved. I saw only fragments, goggles catching floodlight, ice on the hood edge, the angle of a body that might have been his and might not. Then the feed went white. I did not open the hatch. That was the second unfairness. The first was letting him leave. The second was obeying the instruction he gave while praying it would not apply. I still don't know whether the figure at the edge of the lights was Theo, some damaged version of him, or the station using memory as bait. After that, there was only the recorder and me. I took it to communications because the room still had power independent of the corrupted network, and because sitting among dead equipment felt less intimate than sitting in my quarters, where I might have remembered home too clearly. I loaded the cassette. I set the P37 folder beside me. I put my notebooks in the bag. I left the digital drives in my inside pocket where body heat might keep them stable a little longer. Then I began speaking. If anyone finds Halcyon Drift, you are already too late. The station should not be here. If it is here, do not come inside. If it is not here, do not look for where it went. There is a repeating signal below the ice. I believed it was geological. It is not geological in any way that leaves room for us. It enters through systems because systems are how we gave the place handles. I do not know what happened to the others. I do not know if they are dead. I do not know if that distinction still matters where they are. I know the pulse is no longer only in the instruments. I hear it in the radiator ticks, in my pulse at my wrist, in the blood behind my eyes. I know that when I stop moving, it becomes easier to imagine an answer, and that is the danger, not what it says, the fact that responding begins to feel polite. I shut down everything except emergency lights, outer flood array, and this recorder. If there is an inquiry, bury the bore. Burn the records after copying them by hand. Do not send another team to confirm anything. Confirmation is how it grows.
I am going outside in full gear. Not because they asked, because staying in here is worse. Out there, I may freeze or get lost or die inside a weather event I can still call weather. In here, language is already becoming shared property.
Do not drill here. Do not map the signal. Do not turn the rhythm into audio. If you hear a repeating interval where no interval should be, break your equipment and leave. I used to trust data more than my own body. Now I trust the oldest alarm, revulsion, the sense that a place wants too much of your attention. Listen to that and nothing else. I am Michael Vale. I was on this station. I was here. That matters. If the record changes later, this version is the one I chose. Then I stopped. The tape kept rolling. The room sounded enormous around me. Ventilation, cooling clicks. Somewhere in the metal skin of the station, a settling creak like something turning in sleep. I should tell you I went out immediately after that. I didn't. Human beings delay endings 1 minute at a time. I thought of Claire asleep under our blue quilt in Duluth. I thought of Ranger against my boot. I thought of Theo outside the floodlights turning toward the camera. I thought of Alan hearing his dead wife's call sign. Lisa hearing her mother in static. Jonah sitting in the dark asking if I heard them. Each memory felt less private than it should have, as if the room were reviewing them with me. Then the last thing happened. In the black monitor over the comms desk, I saw my reflection sitting perfectly still with the recorder at my elbow. Then the reflected Michael turned his head toward the closed door before I heard the knock.
Not random. Not urgent. Measured. 94 seconds passed. 3 more knocks. I did not open the door. I am alive because I did not open the door. A helicopter found me 36 hours later, 23 miles from the last logged station coordinates, walking south across pressure ridges with no memory of leaving the module or crossing that distance. The survival suit was mine. The recorder bag was still strapped to my chest. 1 digital drive was dead. The tapes survived. Halcyon Drift did not. The recovery mission found unstable ice, anchor scars, a debris field too small for the volume of steel we had occupied, and no station. That was the part officials liked. Missing structure, severe weather, probable cognitive impairment, old language in new folders. No bodies. No public report. Claire left 2 years after I came home, not because she was cruel, because living with me meant living with rules that multiplied until our house felt like a station of its own. There are only so many times a woman can wake at 3 in the morning and find her husband in the kitchen unplugging appliances because a refrigerator compressor chose the wrong interval. So here is the rule my life reduced itself to, the one I promised I would state plainly if I ever told this story in full.
I never listen to repeating sounds in the dark. Not pipes, not engines, not a dripping faucet, not a loose gate in the wind, not hold music on a phone line if it falls into a fixed interval. If a smoke detector chirps at night, I leave the house until morning. If a train crosses town and the wheel joints start spacing themselves too evenly, I turn on every light and every faucet and every television until the pattern breaks. I have not worn a headset alone in 9 years. I have not looked at my reflection in a window after sunset. If there is a room behind me, I have not already checked with the lights on. Sometimes people laugh when I tell them I don't like metronomes. I let them. The tape ends with wind. That part is true. Wind and several seconds of nothing else. Then, just under the threshold where hearing becomes imagination, the rhythm starts again. Not loud, not theatrical, patient. Layered into the weather as if it had always been there waiting for a microphone sensitive enough to admit it. I'm telling you now because silence did not make it smaller. Silence only made it private, and private things grow teeth. If you ever find a report about a missing Arctic station and a signal no one could classify, let it stay unclassified. If someone sends you audio and says, "Listen to this, tell me what you hear," don't. If a place asks for your attention with enough precision to feel intelligent, refuse the invitation. And if tonight, after this is over, your house is quiet and ordinary and safe, and you go into the kitchen for water, and the dark window over the sink gives you back your own face, do not stand there testing whether it moves when you do. Walk away before it has time to learn your timing.